Hi, I'm Thomas A. Bradley. As you probably know by now, I'm an award winning horror author, and welcome to episode 6 of Sundown Rising. Um, as I've always said, all these videos will be available for replay if you need to catch up or just want to see them again. Please, if you will, hit the thumbs up or thumbs down if you don't like it. That's okay. Hit the subscribe button and the little bell icon so you get any notifications. And down in the description box, you can see where you can check out more of my books or whatever if you're interested. So with that, let's just jump right back into where we left off and see what's happening today. I was in the habit of taking no more than 2 victims a night, usually only one. I confined myself to the disposable people, the ones very few, if any, would miss. I never took children. The poor, unfortunate souls that society labeled as bums and degenerates were my primary feeding source. These were the ones the authorities would spend very few dollars and man hours on. Adam and I kept a wary eye on all the reports of murders and disappearances throughout the city. We looked for patterns that were similar to my own. I hoped that my counterpart would also be following an identical approach, hunting cautiously. In a smaller area, our search would have been much simpler. I would have sensed him, smelled his death, as he would mine. A city the size of Philadelphia afforded him some measure of protection from discovery by me, as it afforded me protection from discovery by the authorities. December was waning. The first snowfall had blanketed the city in a white mantle. Some of the homeless had been removed to shelters. Their coalescence in great open spaces made hunting them out of the question, but there were still many that remained among the refuse of the frozen alleyways. My hours awake have increased. The sun sets earlier. I expend most of my energy in search of the other, yet I still must hunt. During daylight, Adam scouts out my nocturnal hunting ground, always jumping randomly around the city, always careful to be back within the realm of my protection before sunset. He too hunts, for there is a counterpart for him as well. As I must, so must the other have a daylight guardian. With the setting of the sun, I arose, slipped as smoke through the stones of my crypt, and entered the house. I could feel Adam's exhilaration as I entered. He was sitting in the kitchen drinking a beer and waiting for me. When I entered, he began his tale. As he searched out my hunting grounds for the evening, he had come across another who seemed out of place in the back streets of the Cobb's Creek neighborhood. Adam told me that they had stared at each other for quite some time, each sizing up the other. He was sure that the man at the far end of the alley had been his counterpart. As he walked cautiously toward him, the man had watched and then fled. There was no doubt in my mind that Adam was correct, as I also knew that at the same time I was having this conversation with Adam, my counterpart was having an identical conversation with his bodyguard. We would meet soon. We would have to. I also knew that the other was aware of the same. I could feel the light touch of his mind, distant, but there, as he could feel mine. There was also something else I could feel, but wasn't sure what it meant. I felt as if I knew this one, but that may have been solely because we were the same. Yet, the feeling I had ran much deeper than that, even though our minds barely touched. I made my hunt and killed quickly. I had some other things for which I needed to plan. Not knowing whether the other would be an ally or enemy, I needed to take some precautions. What I was planning was dangerous. For one thing, it would draw a lot of public attention. Still, under the circumstances, it was one of those things that I felt merited the risk. Getting in and out of the Philadelphia Zoo was the easy part. It was the transport of the animals that was difficult. Despite my strength, the squirming wolves under my arms made my flight a bit tricky, and the mist through which we moved echoed with their growls and snarls. Once on the ground at the house, they settled in quickly. I gave them their orders and something else, something more formidable, before I introduced them to Adam. I gave them my strength. They drank of my blood, but not so much as to take them all the way to undead. I needed them to be watchful during daylight hours, but I also needed them to be able to handle any intruder of my magnitude. Once I'd accomplished this, my guardians were secure. For weeks after my appropriation of the wolves, the newspapers and TV crews followed the story of the missing animals. Eventually, it died down. My concern was not the authorities. My real concern initially was that my counterpart would know why and by whom the wolves were taken. But that dissipated. I came to realize that it might work to my advantage. It would draw the other to me. I needed only to wait and be vigilant. In a small section of the city called Roxborough, we met for the first time. I was preparing to feed. A group of teenagers were partying in a tiny cemetery on the main street of the area, Ridge Avenue. I was preparing to take them when the other arrived. I watched her arrival from atop a building across the street. To the mortals, I was invisible, but not to her. She stopped for a moment to gaze at me, and I could see the fire in her eyes. She then turned and walked toward the teenagers. I was struck by the fact that she appeared no older than they. As she approached, she opened the top few buttons of her blouse. I smiled. Her trap was set. The boys immediately surrounded her. I could feel their desire from here. She let them believe their desires would be fulfilled. When the attack came, it came on swift and brutal wings. She took all of them, the last of which she toyed with as a cat toys with a mouse. She pounced, lifted him into the air, and then dropped him. He would run, and she would be on him again. I could feel her exhilaration. Finally, a few yards from the front gate in Freedom, she ran him down and took his life force. When she finished, she turned and stared up at me. Her mouth gaped open, blood dripping from the corners, and hissed at me, the foulness within her spilling out in a large greenish yellow cloud. It was not yet time for total confrontation. We could both feel that. She evaporated into a fog and floated out of the back of the cemetery. I let her go for tonight. Our minds touched again, much closer this time. When I felt what I felt actually sent a chill up my spine, which didn't happen very often. There was a human quality to her that I could feel. Like I had been, she was a daylight walker. I did not know how this was possible, and it meant that my decision to protect myself with the wolves was justified. It also meant that Adam was at risk. Further precautions were demanded. As I stood there thinking about the situation, a woman came out of a small corner store. She was almost to her car when a man approached her from behind. I could see the knife he was holding at the small of her back and could hear his demands. They got into the car and drove off. I followed. Just outside the city of Philadelphia, a small place called Banderman Falls, they turned onto Northwestern Avenue and went down to a parking lot that was part of Fairmount Park. The man with the knife was convinced that he would not be disturbed there. He was wrong. I watched from above for a few minutes as the woman struggled to retain her clothing and life. She would have done neither had I not intervened. I felt no compassion for her, and my intervention was purely self-motivated. I was not saving her from her attacking. I was saving her attacker from me. I touched the ground, the gravel crunching beneath my feet as I walked toward the car. I rapped on the window with my knuckles. I could have ripped the door off and grabbed him, but I wanted the confrontation. His expression was, at first, surprise. When it melted into anger, it amused me. I stepped back from the car, giving him room to get out. It made me laugh when he told the woman, "Stay right there. I'm not finished with you." "Actually, you are," I said, taunting him. I let him approach me, keeping my eyes averted from his. I didn't want this to end too quickly. I needed to savor the moment. He ran toward me. I could feel his rage. When he was a few feet from me, I spread my arms out to my sides and let him shove the knife into my chest. That's when I grabbed him and let him look into my eyes. I watched as he sank helplessly to their fiery depths. I fed. When I was done with him, I snapped his neck and let him drop. I walked back over to the car. The door was still open and the woman was huddled in the corner of the back seat. I leaned down and looked in at her. "You have a nice night now," I said, "and drive carefully." I hadn't gotten very far on my way home when I felt it. Felt her. I turned, sniffing the air and tasting the mix of life and death. It took only milliseconds for me to get back to the car, but I was too late. The woman was dead, and my counterpart was already gone, but not before leaving me a message that was all too clear. The heads of the victims had been placed on the hood of the car facing each other. Our meeting would soon be face to face. It was a week to the day after that message that our first overtures to our meeting took place. As the sun set on a cold January evening, I rose and greeted my four-legged guardians. I did not anthropomorphize them as with names, nor did I speak to them in any of the man's languages. I communicated in their language, grunts and growls. They had made a nice den for themselves within the perimeter of the brambles that surrounded my crypt. They remained inside that perimeter, except to hunt in turns for their food on the expansive wooded property. They told me we had a visitor. As I entered the rear of the house, Adam and our friend rose. Marco was a rather large man, someone I would have picked as guardian. He and Adam had been having a beer and, most likely, commiserating their fates. Our guest was well schooled. He avoided eye contact with me as much as possible. I tried to put him at ease, telling him that I had no desire to initiate hostilities, either with him or his mistress, but he was still wary. "So," I said, taking a seat at the far end of the kitchen table, "what can we do for you?" "My master," he stumbled with the word, "wishes to meet you. She sends her greetings and offers you the choice of locations for such a meeting." His mouth was dry and he kept licking his lips. His discomfort at being in my presence was measurable. Adam sat quietly, looking between the two of us. "I welcome such a meeting," I said dryly. "I have wondered much about your mistress." I stressed the word, drawing it out, knowing it would make him just the slightest uncomfortable. Although I wanted him to understand that he was in no danger, I didn't want him to report that I was, by any means, weak. "When does she propose the meeting take place?" "I am told," he stammered, to request a time within the week. My master has much she would like to discuss with you." He coughed nervously before continuing. "As she is sure you have much to ask her." I sat back and stroked my chin as if I were contemplating the situation. In actuality, I had been prepared for this for weeks. At length, I sat forward and caught his gaze. This would ensure that my message was in no way corrupted when it was delivered. "I shall meet with your mistress tomorrow night at the same cemetery where we first saw each other. I shall be there 3 hours before dawn. You will accompany her, as Adam will accompany me." I drew him in deeper. "It is absolutely imperative that your mistress comply with my next condition. There will be no feeding in that area tomorrow night. She may feed elsewhere, but the cemetery and the surrounding town are off limits. Naturally, following our meeting, she may feed where she pleases." There was no reason to ask if he understood me clearly. I knew that he did, and I knew that my message would be delivered intact. "Adam will now show you out," I said, standing from my chair and raising myself to its fullest height. "When you leave, you will go straight back to your mistress. You will not stop along the way." He repeated my last instructions as someone might repeat a telephone number they wanted to be sure to remember. I bowed at the waist, a useless gesture, but it added to the atmosphere, I thought. A kind of stokerism. He left immediately under Adam's watchful eye. "Well, my friend," I said to Adam on his return, "it appears as though there will be the long-awaited meeting of the minds." "Yes, sir. Is there anything special you need from me in preparation?" "Yes. I leave nothing to chance, as I am sure is true of her." I told Adam what I wanted from him. I needed to take extra precautions on this, as I was the one at the disadvantage. My counterpart still had the ability to be about in sunlight. I could not allow a situation to develop in which she delayed my departure, allowing the sun to rise before I could leave. And I think that's where we'll stop for this episode. And we will pick it up again, excuse me, next Tuesday at same time, same back channel. So I hope you're enjoying it. Please feel free to leave comments if you wish, and check out my other books. They're much longer. They're novels, so they're a little written a little deeper. Anyway, until the next time, I hope you stay well and have a let's see. Yeah, I will see you again before Halloween, which is definitely our season if you're watching any of this. So stay well, keep the chill in your spine, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.